We are activating your unique self-discovery one show at a time. The Orchard of Wisdom Self-Discovery podcast are at your fingertips, just waiting to inspire and invite you in discovering just how awesome you really are and how to navigate through life in joy, enrichment, personal abundance, in mind, body, spirit, heart, and soul. All the people we bring you are here to serve you on your journey of life. Do enjoy our next show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and a happy new year to you. Welcome back to Choose Positive Living right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is David Stockman. Are you prepared for the great money bubble? Do you know how to protect yourself for the coming inflation storm? I know it all sounds rather intimidating, especially in the first week of the new year. But if we're not prepared, if we don't know what to look out for, we kind of get that cosmic 2x4 and then we go, why didn't I know? He says Americans are facing sticker shock at every turn, from the gas pump to the grocery store to every kind of consumer service. But the eye-popping price increases are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the threat to the country's economic recovery. Inflation showers windfalls on the rich while penalizing the workers, savers, retirees, small business, and most of Main Street economic life. What can we do about it? Well, his book, The Great Money Bubble and Protecting Ourselves from the Coming Inflation Storm, is what we're going to be talking about it today. We all know we've been hit, and my God, we've been hit hard in the last few years. We're all kind of feeling our way out there on how to kind of navigate through this next bubble. We all know there's a recession coming. I'm in Canada, you're in America, but it's going to hit both of us. But we don't know what to do about it. We don't know how to protect ourselves, or, where do we draw in the strings, and where can we kind of stretch out a little bit? So help us, David. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be with you. And you've kind of summarized the topic pretty well. But the key thing is this didn't happen overnight. It
Mhm.
didn't come out of the blue last spring. The point of my book is to demonstrate that it's been brewing for decades, going back really to the 1980s, that the problem stems from Washington in fiscal policy that's out of control, too much spending, too much borrowing, a national debt that has gone from 1 trillion when I was there in 1980 as budget
Wow.
director to 31 trillion today. The point is that it's not going to go away in
No.
6 months or 2 years, even if the Fed sticks to its current effort to bring inflation to heel. There's been too much damage done. There's been too much liquidity pumped into Wall Street and the economy generally. There's too much excess of debt, which is startling. There's 91 trillion of debt on the US economy today, public and private. So we've got our hands full. That's why when we titled the book, we said The Coming Storm. I think people would now believe the storm is here. And
I'm
I
wondering
guess,
what that's hitting me over the head with. Yes.
yeah, but I'm wanting to say that the storm is going to be long lasting and that we are entering a new era where basically the chickens are coming home to roost. The piper is going to be paid. We just had too big a party,
Yeah.
too much easy money, too much borrowing, spending, too much bubble action in the stock market, the cryptoverse, in real estate, anywhere that you really want to point. This is a comprehensive problem. It's not just gas prices. It's not just grocery bills that are now up 12% on a year over year basis and continuing to rise. This is a comprehensive financial failure from too much borrowing and money printing in Washington. So that's where we start.
And I'm glad that, it's not just all based around COVID, because everybody wants to blame that. And yes, of course, there were many mistakes were made, but it's not all about what's happened in the last 2.5, 3 years. As you said, this
Right.
goes back to the 80s. And, if you think about it, coming out of the 70s into the 80s, America was in opulent times. And it
Right.
seemed to be, everybody was like, had the big American dream and could afford this and could afford that. But, whenever something is a little bit too good to be true, generally there's an
It is.
indication that there's going to be a price tag down the road
Yeah.
for this. And
Yeah.
this is where, that it's due now, isn't it? We're kind of having to pay for that opulence of the past.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think if you want to pinpoint when it started, I would say in the summer of 1987, when Alan Greenspan was appointed the new Fed chairman. He was very different than Paul Volcker. As people I think know, Volcker brought inflation to heel, and it was a pretty difficult, challenging, nasty time in the early 80s. He got the job done, and his reward for getting the job done and unleashing this kind of prosperity we had in the 80s that you just mentioned was he got fired from his job. He was replaced by Greenspan. Greenspan wanted to be the toast of the town in Washington. I was around then and have some knowledge of this. And so he began to basically inflate the financial markets like never before. And all of a sudden, people were getting rich at tech stocks. They were all beginning to say the way to build your wealth is to gamble on Wall Street and the stock market. And that sort of became the modus operandi in the country. We had the big crash of dot-com then, but instead of learning a lesson, they just doubled down and printed money even faster. Finally, it caught up with us in 2008, the great financial crisis. And again, they doubled down and tripled and quadrupled the rate at which money was printed. Now, let me give one number. I know we don't want to get bogged down in too many numbers, but sometimes you have to put a quantitative dimension on this to understand how serious it is. When Greenspan became Fed chairman, there was about 5 trillion of debt on the US economy. And I'm not talking just about the federal government. This is households, with your mortgages, credit cards.
Collective.
This is businesses with all the debt that they borrow for good reasons and bad. This is financial institutions and government all combined. Now, the reason I mention that is that the GDP was 3 trillion, so it was a little more than GDP, but it was within the historical range. I think people will be startled to know that 35 years later today, the total public and private debt is not 5 trillion, it's 91 trillion.
God.
Okay. The
How do you dig
GDP,
yourself out of that,
yeah.
though?
Well,
That's
the point is the GDP has gone up somewhat in that period of time, but only to about 25 trillion. So our ratio of debt to GDP, which is really the leverage ratio of our society as a whole, just like people look at their balance sheet, how much income do I have? How much debt do I have? What's the ratio? Can I carry the debt? Is it prudent? Well, if we look at the nation as a whole and we look at society as a whole, we're at the highest debt to income ratio in recorded history for the United States. And that's why we've now reached the point where we've inflated things so badly that even the Federal Reserve, which was, the culprit behind all this with its low interest rates and easy money and all this quantitative easing, which was just buying bonds in the bond market with credit printed from thin air. But anyway, even the Fed now has realized this is out of control. Last March, they started raising interest rates for the first time in a decade. And now we're not even close to bringing inflation to heel. It's still running 6-7%, the highest levels, since the 1970s. But the huge increase in interest rates on all this debt is going to trigger a recession, big time recession, that's going to be pretty long lasting beginning next year. So that will put us in the soup. We will have both inflation that's too high and that's eating away at paychecks, that's eating away at savings. And at the same time, we'll have a pretty rip roaring recession that are going to cause people to worry about their job or to lose their job or to be laid off or to have their hours cut back or their wages cut back. It's going to
or
be
all
a
of the
very
above.
yes, it's going to be a very difficult time. So I don't take any great pleasure or joy out of these kinds of warnings, but I do. I've been at this long enough.
Yes.
I spent 50 years on both in Washington and then Wall Street. to recognize that it's important that people realistically and in an undiluted and unvarnished way look at the facts and then make conclusions that are prudent and then attempt to cope with the circumstances that we've been dealt. And I think that's important. The average guy didn't cause this problem
No,
because
no, and
the
that's what I was
average
going to mention.
guy
Yeah.
was either sucked in by this and
Yeah.
he gambling and buying Bitcoin or the other
Hmm.
cryptos, and he thought they'd buy the tech stocks and that he would get permanently rich until they all started collapsing in the last few
Yes.
months. But people were lured into this because the Federal Reserve basically was making everything look a lot better than it was.
It- it-
Now we're facing the music. As I said,
yes.
it's the time of reckoning.
I had somebody else on a little while ago. I mean, they were talking about this interest rates and inflation and everything. And what that does is it stifles the economy because nobody can afford anything. They're not buying
Right.
houses, not buying cars. They're not buying anything because it is like, well, I don't know if everybody knows there's a recession in 2023. So everybody knows as well, maybe I should just hone in and upspend. Well, how
Right.
does the economy grow? It grows with people spending, going out
Yeah.
and buying. But if they
Yeah.
are watching their pennies and at the same time, panicked, will I even have a job down the road? Is this going to happen? That going to happen? Then spending comes to a stop, or everybody goes on credit cards, right?
Yeah.
So increasing
Yeah.
that debt, and we're ending up with economies suffering because of it, because we're not
Yes.
having. When there is more money to spend, it generates. When there isn't, it pulls back, and the deficit just goes up. You know, we're actually being the victims of um let's put it, the fat cats
Yeah. Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
making the decisions, and it benefits them. There always is a
Right.
way to benefit them. Their purses get fattened at the expense of. But we've other than quote voting, which nowadays doesn't seem to work either, is that we feel powerless to do anything about this bad decision after bad decision after bad decision that's been going on for so long that we're now paying the price for. So uh, it is hard to know how we can empower the individual to not only
Mhm.
navigate through this, which is what I want to talk about today, but how can we change the tide of the decision making?
Well, those are the great big questions, but I think before we get into an answer, we need to elaborate, reinforce something you just said, and that is the fat cats benefited and no one else did. Now, the
Mm.
same numbers I gave you from 1987 to the present in terms of debt and the Fed and GDP and so forth, let's look at the net worth of the American public. And these are not numbers I make up, they're actually
Mm.
published by the Federal Reserve. So you could take them with a grain of salt, but I think they're reasonably indicative of what happened. Between 1987 and the present, the net worth of the top 1%, okay, went up $40 trillion over that period. The net worth of the bottom 50% went up only 2 trillion during the same period. So the 1% gained 20 times more than the 50%.
Yes, the
And
fat cats
that just tells you that the system
is
was
broken.
not working for the Main Street
No.
economy or for the average family. In fact, the Federal Reserve began to say, we have to have 2% inflation. We don't have enough inflation, the economy is going to underperform. Well, I think that was baloney. But the point is, the 2% inflation hurt the guy who had savings, was retired, and
Hmm.
found that that money that he'd saved over a working lifetime
Is
wasn't
nothing.
going as far.
Right.
Or people that were in industries like competing with Mexico or competing
Yeah.
with China or Vietnam weren't getting wage increases, but the cost of living then, not
Yes.
not not today, but then was going up 2-3% a year, and they were getting further and further behind. So my point is, during this long boom, this big party of 30 years, the ultra rich got even richer, and the average guy on Main Street basically struggled to catch up or actually slipped behind.
Or
So
just
that's
survive.
that's
Yeah.
what has happened. So people
Mm.
have to say something is wrong in rotten in Denmark, as we
Yes.
always used to say, and
There's
we
a
need to
stench
get to the
somewhere. Yeah.
right, and we need to get to the bottom of it. But I
Mm,
think it starts with understanding that a lot of problems are caused by Congress. A lot of problems are caused by the occupants of the White House who think
hmm
they, can make the economy boom and get reelected as a result. That's clearly what Trump tried to do.
Right.
Didn't work. But
The
the
illusionist.
point is, behind all that, there is kind of a magician making all this happen, which is the Federal Reserve
Mm,
printing all this money. You just can't have interest rates below inflation,
right.
because what that says is the borrower is having his debt reduced and the saver is having his wealth or asset shrunken. So this
hmm
can't work. I mean, how could you go 5 years, 10 years, or on a permanent basis with the saver getting further and further behind and the borrower getting, debt forgiveness effectively? It
Right.
doesn't work. And that's why we're at this junction right now where the Fed is actually behind the curve, but it's attempting to get interest rates up high enough to at least equal inflation so that we're no longer seeing our savings erode or shrink. But also, until you do that, Volcker proved it in the late 70s, early 80s, until you get the interest rates well above inflation, you're not going to bring inflation down to something that's even tolerable. Now, they say 2%. I say all inflation is bad. It ought to be zero. But if right now, I think people would be happy if we could get back to 2%. My point is that we've got so much excess built into the economy that it's going to take years to get to the
Yeah.
2%, even with the Fed sticking to its game plan, and that there's going to be a lot of pain getting from here to there in terms of layoffs, recession, people having their income, imperiled in some way or not or another. Yet that's what lies ahead. Now, there's two things to do. One is in the public sphere and one's in the private. In the public sphere, we got to start electing people that understand there's no free lunch and we can't just borrow and print our way to prosperity. And that requires a big change, frankly, in both parties.
hmm
I'm somewhat keen on the Republicans because I was one. I was a Republican congressman from Michigan. But in the last several decades, the
hmm
Republicans have gotten as lax,
Yes.
about fiscal responsibility as the Democrats. So we need to, and then we need to elect people who will understand that the job of the Fed is not to make Wall Street rich.
Right.
The job of the Fed is to keep the dollar sound and capable of, buying 100 cents on the dollar.
Being a
As
generator, not a deficit.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But then what do we do while we're waiting for that miracle to happen? Because when we see what happens in the elections, including the last one, which didn't change much at all, and it should have. Um, People have to take what I would call defensive, prudent steps. And the first thing is to recognize the party's over. You're not going to make a lot of
hmm
money on Wall Street anymore. And don't be kind of suckered in, lured in by, Wall Street brokers will say the bottom's in. Now's the time to buy. You're going to have a big gain
There's
if
no
you
free
do.
ride. There's no
Or
free ride.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Or that the crypto is a good place to go right now because there's been such a huge decline in values that you can't help but make more.
hmm
The answer is no. The financial system is still so badly inflated that to buy stock at this high level of the market or to buy bonds where the yields are still way too low is not a prudent thing to
Right.
do. And what people have to do is begin to try to get their balance sheet shock proof, which means if you can pay down debt because you have some winners in your portfolio of stocks, now would be the time to do it.
Mm.
Sell the stock, use the cash to pay down debt. Secondly, now would be the time, unfortunately, to tighten belts. We just are not going to be able to live hand to mouth, as high on the hog as we have
Yeah.
for the last 20 or 30 years. Now, people could try, but I think the more prudent thing to do is spend a little less, save a little more, reduce any debt that you have, and hunker down for what's going to be a difficult period of time. Now, that isn't the kind of message that
Yeah.
people like to hear.
But
But
I'm
it's
afraid it's
better,
necessary.
but I still think it's better to be warned
Yes.
about the hazards ahead than to drive, hit the road driving full speed ahead and then, hit the potholes.
Or drive off the cliff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or find out there's a cliff due
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah, that's worse. So
That
anyway, that's kind of the gist of what I've tried to lay out in summary terms in the
in the book.
Great Money Bubble. Yeah,
Right. I want to switch back to politicians. I think that, I had somebody else on this week when he was talking about the central bank that makes all the decisions and they're completely out to lunch as far as what, the general population needs. But I think what we have to do is we know systems are broken. We know that there are many things like lobbyists and people buying politicians.
yeah,
We don't have that honest representation anymore. We don't trust the representation we have anymore. They've forgotten that they're actually a servant of the people. And it's become about ego, it's become about power, it's become about money, and it's become about the 1% serving the 1%. So I think what we have to do is look at these systems in politics have caused this problem, have created
yeah,
this monster. So the filibuster, the lobbyists, all of that. Let's go back to the people, one person voting for another and none
yeah,
of this other crap. And let it also be an even playing field as far as any politician vying for presidency or vying for power, that there is a cap on how much that can be actually spent. So
yeah,
they're not buying the position or they're not being bought. If we do that, we have a little bit more of an honest field, and we actually end up with people who are wanting to go into this line of work to serve. But until we actually change that system, we're just going to have more and more of the same old. A lot of BS and no content, and certainly many people being left behind. And it doesn't matter how they sugarcoat it, or how pretty they make it, or how they say the right words and fool people into believing that they're going to get their oats. No, you're going
yeah,
to be plowing
yeah.
the field, but you're not going to be getting anything from it at all. So stop buying the BS, right? So I think that is an overhaul that just literally somebody has to have the guts to say, we have to reset this entire
Mhm.
program. And then as far as pulling in our belts and everything else, I think that for a very long time, and especially in the American or North American world, it has been more is more. You've got
Yeah,
to have more. You've got to have the big car, the big house, the big this, the big that, because that defines your importance. That defines your status in life.
mhm.
That is your symbol of who you are. And people bought into that illusion and they end up being unhappy and disconnected because none of that will give them any of the content that really comes from within and not without. So for people downsizing their homes, downsizing their car, getting back more to actually community based, knowing the people in
Yeah,
the community, talking to people, supporting one another, entertaining at home with potlucks instead of grand dinner parties or out at restaurants. There's so many things that we can do that really actually brings us more home to a more humble, honest, but more fulfilling lifestyle. Because for
yeah.
so long we've bought this Kool-Aid, we're drowning in it, folks. We're drowning in it. Has it made you any happier? No. It's given you more anxiety, more in debt. You have no idea if you can sustain that lifestyle. And,
Right,
and you're so busy chasing that proverbial carrot, you have no time to live and enjoy life anyway. So maybe this
right.
reset is a good reset.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of what you just said. And I might say, for my own part, I grew up on a farm in rural Michigan, and that was the lifestyle. We worked hard on the farm day in and day out. And then every now and then there's a community supper, there's a
Yes.
potluck dinner.
Yeah.
We would go to the church for some, harvest festival in the fall or whatever it might be. But it was a much different world than we live today. And I had a comparison the other day. I'm in New York City. and our daughter lives in upstate New York. So we were driving out of New York, out of the city, heading north. And as we went through the edge of New York City, I couldn't help but noticing these giant buildings that we were going by, building after building with
Yeah.
no windows. Okay, no windows. And so the answer is, what the world are? And
What
these aren't small.
institution is
They're
this? What prison is this?
no, no, it wasn't. It wasn't prisons. What they were was storage facilities
Yes.
where people
Yes.
rent a space
Uh-huh.
to put all the stuff they've bought that they
Mhm.
can't use, don't use, or don't even remember they have, because that's kind of the symbol of this acquisitive spirit, this idea you just keep buying, 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 and if it's on sale, or it's so easy now to order it online and
Mhm.
from Amazon and all the rest of them. But it just struck me that 30, 50 years ago, there wasn't one of these massive
No.
buildings dedicated to storage because people didn't have stuff they didn't need, or what they had was because it was part of their household furnishings.
But also the
So,
households were roomier, and now what they're
yeah,
building now are actually for mice, not people. They're so
yeah,
goddamn small, they
yeah,
can't, there's nowhere to put even their suitcase or anything over it. And,
yeah.
never mind swinging a cat, you can't even swing a mouse in those places.
Yeah. Yeah, but you see, the thing is, this idea of accumulation, this
Mm,
kind of crude materialism, and I'm a gung ho capitalist, so if people want to accumulate things, that's fine with me. But if you look at it more from a, kind of a overall spiritual
mm,
perspective,
hmm.
the answer is that people are being encouraged to chase all of this, all of these possessions, all these goods beyond their ability, their
Yes,
means to sustain it. And how do I know that? Because the savings rate, household savings rate in the United States now is barely 2%,
hmm.
the lowest in modern history. In fact, I think all history. And it compares to when I was a kid, it was 10%. Back in the good old,
Yes,
1950s, 1960s, the prosperity of that time, people saved 10%, they spent 90%. There was a balance. They weren't, filling the storage facility up with stuff they didn't need, and
right.
they weren't living hand to mouth. If something went wrong, they had some rainy day funds. They had
Yes.
some cash in the bank. We
How
don't
can
have
how
that
can
today.
people have rainy day funds today though, when quite honestly all the prices are going up with food. There was somebody on the news the other day that her mortgage had gone up by $1,000. You've got all the expenditures have gone up, up, up. Now I'm a
Yeah,
pensioner. Has my pension gone up? Absolutely not. Right?
yeah,
I'm still
yeah, yeah,
expected. Everything has gone up 12, 20 or more percent. And I'm
yeah,
expected to still maintain my life at that
yeah,
other lower level. And it's like people, I've got another person on this, the slave wage. Literally, you're working as a slave just to get a
yeah.
wage. You're not
Right,
enjoying
right.
it. Your wage is not even enough to cover the month. Never mind save anything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, yeah, I think that's a valid point, but the big issue here is, where do you break the cycle? Where do you
Mm,
start the analysis? In other words, people are saying my mortgage has gone up and up. But the problem was they probably bought more house than they could afford,
yeah,
let's say 2, 3 years ago, with an interest rate that was 3%. And that's not a real number. In other words, you can't have 30-year mortgages at 3% in an economy where you have that much inflation, because it means that whoever supplied the savings to fund that mortgage isn't making any return at all, and it just won't work. It doesn't sustain itself over time. So, what I'm saying is, people developed a standard of living based on prices that were not going to be sustained at these low levels, on borrowing money to supplement their income that they thought was easy to do because the interest rates were
mhm,
low. And lo and behold, that dream ended. And we're now at a point where the mortgage rate is 7% or pushing 7% and going up, where credit card debt is now at 19%, and that's for someone with a fairly decent credit score.
Yeah.
And in other words, the whole false reality that was fueled by this big financial bubble, the money bubble, whatever you want to call it, is now coming to an end. And we're going to face real things. And so, people will say, this isn't fair. And my mortgage, if it was a variable rate mortgage, or if I have to refinance for some reason or another, or cars. I mean, people
Yes.
have used cars that now have a debt level that's way below the worth of the car. So
Right.
if
Yeah.
they try to trade it in,
Yep.
they got to come up with cash to
Yeah.
pay off the old one. So all of this is going on because for a period of time, car loans were too cheap. So every time, across the spectrum, when the Fed gives false price signals to people, they respond in ways that after the fact look imprudent, but seemed rational at the time. That's what we're dealing with now. Too much car debt, too much house debt, too much general debt, because a while back it all seemed like it would pencil out, except those interest rates were false. They were deceptively and unsustainably low.
And of course, when people went for a mortgage, they were not informed
Yeah,
that, if the government puts up the interest rates, you're going to be paying that. They're just looking for
yeah,
the deal, right?
yeah,
So,
right,
and people
right.
didn't do people kind of buy into the information that other people sell them. And of course, if you've got people selling them a bill of goods and they're not getting the real facts, how are they based to make a proper decision, an informed decision? I
Yeah,
think, we're saturated right now with information in the world. But the trouble is, it is through the noise. How do you actually find the valid information that really does
yeah,
apply to you and
right,
not what I call the Fox News, take a pimple, make it a volcanic eruption. We don't,
yeah,
we're saturated with sensational. And
right,
so we don't know what to buy anymore. So this is why you're fake news and all of that. Well, there's a lot of fake news there because they
right.
do elaborate it. How do we know what's the honest news? How do we know how to make a decision? How do we know what to prepare for? Because there's been so much chatter that people have
Mm-hmm.
drowned it out and they don't know where to go to get the right information. What do I really do? Who can I really trust? What are the real facts? And how do I prepare for it?
Yeah. Well, those are very hard questions, but I think we're learning in the last while here that the sources that people used to trust, the mainstream media, as I call it, the MSM, mainstream media,
Mhm,
the New York Times, the Washington Post,
mhm.
Canada has its equivalent, CNN, they all basically say the same thing. Frankly, I'm very down on journalists these days because I think they've gotten lazy and
Yes.
they practice what I call access journalism. In
Mm,
other words, if you're covering the Pentagon, well, then don't, reveal that the things aren't going so well in Ukraine after all, despite what they're saying, because someone will then cut you off and you will have to work for your next story.
right.
So this happens across the board. Every month the Fed has a meeting, and then the chairman of the Fed, who is now Jay Powell, has a press conference afterwards. That's an important forum to find out what the most powerful institution in the world is doing. And the central bank is the most powerful
Hmm.
institution. And
Too
yet
much power.
all the financial journalists who are sitting in that big room hoping to get called upon
Hmm.
are practicing access journalism. They don't want to question the Fed's policies. They
Right.
don't want to ask tough questions because the next time their hand will be up and it won't be recognized.
Right. It's
So,
almost
so
become
we have,
tabloid journalism, hasn't it?
yes, it
Yeah.
really has. And, when I was starting in politics, I went to Capitol Hill when I was in my early 20s, became a legislative assistant. That was right near the end of the Vietnam War. And we had a press corps at that time that wasn't buying the Kool-Aid. And I
Right.
think part of the reason why, we finally, Johnson finally recognized the folly of Vietnam was Walter Cronkite,
Hmm.
the great
Yes.
trusted voice of the mainstream media at that time. In the winter of 1968, after the Tet Offensive proved that we weren't winning the war after all,
Right.
said enough is enough. Walter Cronkite said that this isn't what it's cracked up to be. Here's some pretty unvarnished facts that we have to deal with. Now, that's one little anecdote, but it's the kind of press that we had. The
Mm.
Pentagon Papers were published a few years later, and they revealed how public opinion had been so heavily manipulated in order to sustain political support. We had all the hearings of the Church Committee and others
Mm.
during the 1970s. I became a congressman. I was elected to the House in 1976. We went after witnesses from the Carter administration before our committees, hammer and tong, and we had press people who were digging into information that then became part of the discussion. It seems that all of this healthy debate,
Yes.
dialogue that was part of,
And accountability.
yes, and accountability that was part of the process back then is slowly disappeared. And we now have basically, media that is focused on the 24/7 news cycle and breaking news, trying to get the attention of the public, and they do it with sensationalism,
Yes. And fear-based.
sloppy sloppy,
Mm.
lazy journalism.
Right.
Now, I don't think that they're necessarily, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory view. They're necessarily trying to dupe the public or peddle fake information. I think they're caught up in a process that leads to very bad journalism and to a public that is not nearly as well informed as it should be, given that we have such great technology today.
Yes.
We ought to be better informed. In other words, the public debate ought to be even more robust. It ought to
Yes.
be even more effective today with all of the social media and the rest of it. And actually, it's gone the
Gone
other
the other
way.
way.
And then when
Yeah.
we hear that, the FBI was calling the Twitter managers once a week to tell them we want this, this
Mm.
guy shut off and that guy
Yeah.
toned down. This only shows you how rotten the whole system had become, and that we, as you say, we need a huge reset
Yes.
if we're going to get back to some semblance of a functioning democracy and of a healthy capitalist economy. But we got a long way to
We
go.
got a long way to
But
go. And that
but
and
it
that
needs,
that long way isn't just, before we go any further and I answer that, do you ever see the show The Newsroom?
yes, yes, yeah,
Now, that newsroom, I think, was kind of the epitome of showing where real news was being eroded,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That was
you're right.
so brilliantly written. It was so brilliantly played. And you
Yeah,
could see the fight to actually bring the truth, to hold people
yeah,
accountable, to really address things and no water it down. No, this
yeah,
person won't back you if you do that. And you could see
yeah,
the erosion going on right there. And that was 2010 that when that came out. But
yeah.
also,
But the problem with that show is it didn't last very many seasons.
it did
And
3 seasons. Yeah.
yeah, three, but it was a great show. And as far
Yes.
as I'm concerned, it could have gone on for 7 or 8 or 9.
Absolutely.
But,
It could have
but,
been the compass. It could
yeah,
have been the compass for other journalists to
yeah,
look at the
yeah,
warnings
yeah,
and that
yeah,
where is your authenticity?
yeah,
Where is your
right.
accountability?
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
like, we're buying headliners today. And I think this is the second part of what I was about to say is, where is our responsibility? We like to point a finger, but there's three fingers pointing back at us and saying the reason why there's so much Kool-Aid over there is because we've bought it. We're drinking
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We've got to
Exactly.
take responsibility. Your CNNs and your Fox and all of this sensationalism. What does sensationalism do? Gets people up and conspiracy people, get people afraid. What happens when people are afraid? Somebody's pulling the strings and now they have them in control. We have lost sight of our own decision making, our own deducing, our own
Right.
really asking the right questions to the right people. And we've just handed ourselves over and buying any codswallop that comes out all the time. So we have to take ownership as individual participants on this earth as to what we're buying, what we're contributing to, and what we are actually going to do about it. Because it's not just waiting for government to sort it out. It's only when the people say, government sort it out, that we start
Yeah.
seeing the change. But we've got to get there ourselves.
Right. You're right. You hate to acknowledge it, but in a way, the public has become a herd of dutiful
Sheeple.
flock, not a herd, a flock of dutiful sheep.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
and
sheeple.
that's really unfortunate. And but on the other hand, I haven't given up on democracy. I was, involved in 1980 when Reagan was the candidate. And of course, the mainstream media said he doesn't have a snowball's chance in a hot
Right.
place of being elected.
Yeah.
He's an actor. His
Uh-huh.
views are off the mainstream spectrum. And what happened was that people were so upset with the double-digit inflation, with
Hmm.
the Jimmy Carter economy, with the exhortation that you ought to put on your cardigan sweater and shiver in the cold. That was kind of the message,
Yeah.
It was one that nothing can be done and it's going to get worse. And they said, no, we want to try something different,
Yeah.
even if we don't understand entirely where he's going. And as a result, there was a realignment election in 1980 and then a landslide in 1984. Now, unfortunately, the Republicans, lost their way over
Oh
the
my
next
God.
couple of decades
2016,
and
boy, did
made
they
it
lose their
worse.
way.
They
Yeah.
lost their way, let me tell you.
But there's no
But
authenticity there anymore.
but
We
there
just don't
was
believe them.
yes, but there was at that time a difference made. The
Mm,
narrative changed. There was a period, 1984 election morning in America. Again, that wasn't just the advertising campaign. It was
right.
kind of what people thought after the bad times of the late 70s, early 80s. So you can change the course of history, the public can, but if you do the same old thing and elect the same old candidates and you don't ask your party to do something different instead of just saying the same thing as the partisan opponent, you're not going to lead the public in a new direction. So
And leaving the public with pitchforks,
yeah,
riling people up into anger and hatred and disconnect and discord, so much so that they will deny the Constitution and January 6th happened and like all of that was the puppeteering. Our
yeah,
president just told us to do this. Our president just told us to do that. Bah, bah, bah. Do I know it's wrong what I'm doing? Is
yeah,
this the way to do it? They didn't even question it. The
yeah,
president told them to do it. So, we want a leader that's going to lead people down the angry, destructive, and downright just unproductive way,
yeah,
set us back to Neanderthal times? Or do we need a leader that questions us as to what are we going to do? Don't put this all on my shoulders. This is public and government working together. This is what I see as a plan. Are you with me on it? Do you want me to see change thing? We've got to have that open dialogue. We've got to have that communication. It seems to be once they get elected, it's screw you, everyone else. If you don't
yeah,
agree with me, you can go to hell. And then it just becomes the fighting. And what we have seen for so long and we're so tired of it is mudslinging. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
if who can throw the biggest mud ball? How unintelligent and
yeah,
unproductive is that?
yeah.
Where is the conversation and the debate?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I can remember back to when I was there in the early '80s in the Reagan administration. There was a lot of sharp debate. There was a lot of
Hmm.
big difference of opinion and partisanship. It's part of the democratic process. But it was very interesting. The Democrats were led by Tip O'Neill, who was an old style Irish politician from Boston, as far to the left as Reagan was to the right. But when the two of them would get together for a meeting with the congressional leaders in the White House, they'd spend the first like one third of the meeting telling Irishman jokes, to each other
The
because
common
Reagan was
ground,
Irish as well. So there
right? The
was
common
like a
ground, right? Yeah,
rapport. There
yeah,
was
yeah.
an ability to keep the communications going without throwing the mud and the bricks and all the rest of it.
We don't need
But
anybody in power who has a narcissistic ego. They're not
yeah,
serving anybody other than themselves, as is extremely of it. All the dictators that we see in the world are highly narcissistic people. Where does narcissism come from? It comes from little boys that are incredibly insecure, trying to prove their power by being these narcissistic psychopaths in many ways. And they don't care who they hurt, they don't care who it costs, as long as they look big, as long as they look powerful. And they're just egomaniacs that really represent how small they are inside. And
Yeah,
anybody
yeah.
that disagrees with that, they're going to come after you and take vengeance on you because they don't want to be revealed as small inside.
Yeah, and the point you're making actually can be carried one step further. It just reminds me what happens when politicians hang around the water cooler too long or the basket, and they're there for years and years and decades, is they begin to develop an inflated sense of their importance in the world, that
Hmm.
they're kind of God's gift to humanity, and they are less and less willing to listen to their constituents, which is what their job is. So I have a
Yes.
solution for that. I have a
Yeah.
solution for that. And I saw it, all those years I was in politics. The guys that had been there 30 and 40 years were the real bad actors because they were so set in their ways and they were so
Right.
certain they were right that you couldn't get things done. And that is term limits.
Thank
One,
you. Yes.
the founding fathers in our country, and I'm not sure about Canada, but the founding fathers did not want a political class
Yes.
of permanent bureaucrats or politicians running the democracy. They saw democracy as a participatory thing in
Hmm.
which average people from the villages and towns and
Yes.
cities
Could all
would
participate
take
in.
their turn,
Yes.
and then go back to their
Right.
real business in life. And so I strongly think that we should have 6 year limit on House members because the guy who happened to succeed me in the seat that I had for a few years just retired this year after 38 years. Okay, I
I
mean,
I
this
mean,
is
it's stale.
yeah,
It's
yeah. But
stale.
anyway,
Let's think,
yeah,
and that we need fresh blood, we need fresh
right,
opinions,
right.
and you need people who
So
are willing to, get
right.
out of their box.
So my thought, my recommendation, and I talked about this before, is 3 terms for a House member, 6 years, 1 term for a senator, 6 years, and change the presidential term to 6 years, but you can't run for reelection. Now, all of a sudden, everybody is looking at a totally different framework
Yes.
or perspective on what they're doing. One of the things that I can remember well from when I was in the House, you would get elected, you would go to Washington after the holidays, get sworn in again, and the next thing you did was have a meeting with your staff to figure out how to start raising money for the next election.
I
Okay.
know.
All right.
I'm
So
mind
if
blown on that. Like
yeah,
half of their
so
term is fighting
yeah,
for the next election.
so if we basically take this
Yes.
incumbency factor out of the equation, and let me tell you, when you're the incumbent, you have so many advantages, some of them obvious and visible, others not so visible. Even in my congressional office back then, maybe we had 20 staffers. We had 2 or 3 people that did nothing but casework, which meant they helped someone with their Social Security
Hmm.
check if it wasn't coming. They helped someone else get a loan from the Farmers Home Administration. They helped someone else, deal with another government agency. And so, therefore, over time, you could build up tremendous amounts of IOUs simply by using the resources of your office to do individual good deeds for your
Yes.
constituents. Now, okay, that needs to be done, but if you do it for 30 years, you've got too many IOUs, okay?
Exactly.
If you do it for 6 years, that's tolerable.
That can propel you
So,
to the your
yeah,
next career
yeah,
base, and you've
right,
built up that. Yeah, I agree with you completely. I agree that the president, when you look at 4 years, they're kind of just really getting things going by that fourth year.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then now all the bloody time is on them being re-elected, and we're
yeah,
sick to death of elections. We truly
yeah,
are, folks.
yeah,
So giving somebody actually 6 years where they really can get their teeth into something,
Right.
And again, the accountability, the assessment at different times, every 2 years, an assessment, what's going on? Does something need to be tweaked to hold them accountable? It's all of that. Don't let them just rest on their laurels. But it gives them time to really get something done. And without the emphasis on being the re-election, it allows people to actually watch what they're doing. If they're wanting to come in and step into their place, what can they do differently? Because there's reference. But I find that politics has become so much more about a popularity contest and who's going to get elected than it is on representation for the
I
people.
agree. And
Completely.
also, even more important, it's a money raising marathon. Okay.
I know. That's why I said it has to
MRM,
be a
money
cap.
raising
Yeah.
marathon. So
Yeah.
if
It's
you deal with
ridiculous the amount of
if
money.
you deal with incumbency, if you deal with money, you're going to change the system quite for the better. But the money part of it is all encompassing and has gotten worse as there are more and more PACs and all of these different mechanisms.
Billionaires buying seats and
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah,
Oh no, it
yeah.
just is
But
wrong.
so the reform that I have recommended is that we limit campaign finance to small contributions,
Yes.
$100, $200,
Yes.
and the rest is public money if you qualify because you're the nominee of one or the
Hmm.
other parties, or you get so many signatures on a petition, or there are a lot of different ways to qualify candidates. Once they're qualified, they get a set amount of public money plus the small contributions they can raise from thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people. Now, if we put that kind of campaign finance, coupled it with the limits on term limits, incumbency, we would have a totally different system than we have today. The two political parties really don't stand for anything anymore
No.
except raising money in
Yes.
order to
And
reelect.
arguing with each other.
Yeah, but the argument with each other is really a way of raising money.
Yeah.
They're basically trying to convince their contributors that the world's going to go to hell in a handbasket unless you reelect me and our
Yeah.
party and our
I'm
incumbents.
the
And
savior. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So those are the big reforms that are needed, and a lot of good things would happen if
What would you
we
feel about the filibuster and the lobbyists? What would you do
Uh,
there?
well, we got to do something about lobbying. I'm not sure exactly how because I'm very strongly free speech, First Amendment, and
But
so therefore,
but it's the money that comes with the lobbyist.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think, you can lobby an idea, but don't put the money there because then you're buying.
yeah. I think we need to have much more disclosure about
Mm,
where the money comes from and how much is spent and what it's spent for and
yeah.
who they're trying to influence. That's clear. But one thing I strongly believe that would help the lobbying problem alleviate itself significantly is if you forbid, just make it a ban on former staffers from Capitol Hill or elsewhere in the political process and congressmen from becoming lobbyists. Because what
Mm,
happens now is someone serves 20 years, he builds up a lot of IOUs, he then becomes a lobbyist and gets rich.
right.
That's the route.
Yeah.
Or people spend their 20s as a staffer in a Senate office and then the rest of their life as a big fat cat lobbyist,
Mm,
for one of the big companies or one of the big trade
right.
associations,
Because they got the
and
inside. Yeah.
making a pretty healthy living in terms of the Washington D.C. Standard of living. So there are we need lobbying reform as well. I
Right.
agree with.
What about filibuster?
And I'm for the filibuster at 60.
You are?
Yeah, yeah,
Explain why.
because I think we need to have a break on the system in one of the houses. I'm not for a filibuster rule in both houses. In the House, a majority can work its will with what they call closed rules, which means they bring a bill to the floor. You can't amend it. That's a closed rule. The Speaker and the majority party have a lot of ways to really push stuff through the House fast. So if the House is going to be the fast track, then I think the Senate needs to be the
Mm,
deliberative
right.
track. And the filibuster at 60, I think it's okay. Maybe it should be 55. I don't know, but we shouldn't have fast track 51-49 rule in the Senate as well as in the House. We'll get a lot of bad legislation.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of good ideas out there. As I said, the other person I interviewed this week, you guys need to talk to each other, both saying a great deal of the same things. And, his was around, career versus just the slave job,
Yeah,
mindlessly, robotically working just for a salary that you don't know is going to sustain you and how we need to change that approach. But um, nothing is going to get done by government alone. The people have to look at, okay, we're in a recession. Nothing happens without some benefit from it. So just
yeah,
like, COVID slowed everything down, made people pause, made them reflect on their lives, and many redirected in a different direction.
yeah,
There's look at the recession as doing the same. What's really important in your life? Friends, family, your own health, your own well-beingness, your own purpose in life, really look to that. And how do you sustain what's really important and what can you let go that really is not important and that's really been a financial burden to you? So I think
yeah,
it's a great time to reflect and hone in and really look back at your community and what can you do collectively together. So, everything could be changed to a positive. Again, choose positive living. It's all a question of choice of how we choose to look at things. Recession, die,
yeah,
or recession, repivot,
yeah,
redirect and
yeah,
redo. But
yeah,
the same thing comes to us, the people, have to put forth to the governments what you're doing is no longer acceptable anymore, and change has to happen. And it's not going to happen by us being polite or sitting on the back burner. We've got to
yeah,
be participants and we've got to step up. Emails, letters, open forums, no bashing,
yeah,
no
yeah,
bashing, no mudslinging. Let's be
yeah,
articulate. Let's
yeah.
be intelligent about this. Let's
Thoughtful.
ask the
Yeah,
right question, heartfelt, mindfelt, and really be a part of that collective because we can't keep blaming a system that's gone wrong when we've been the fuel to allow it to go wrong. So if we want to
yeah,
put it right, we've got to be a part of the equation.
yeah. I agree with that completely, and I think one of the things that people need to focus more on, and this is, the idea that when some unfortunate circumstances occur, we should look for the silver lining and not just look for someone to blame. Now, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are going to be blaming the Republicans or the
Yeah.
Democrats or someone else for the recession. And we don't really like to have recession, but we
No.
should understand there's a reason why they happen. They,
Yes.
they don't happen to punish people or because the economic laws
Mm-hmm.
are cruel. That
Right.
that
Yeah.
isn't why.
There's
They
no
happen
economic God
because
coming down to cast you
yeah,
to
yeah,
hell.
yeah,
Yes,
right, right.
it's not
They
happening, whatever they say.
happen. No, they happen because unsustainable things develop, get encrusted in the economy, bubbles, debt, high living,
Mm-hmm.
uh, inadequate savings. There's all kinds of reasons. But the idea once upon a time was that if we have one of these unfortunate cycles, then we need to use it as a cleansing process
Mm-hmm.
to basically stop doing the things that are not sustainable
Mm-hmm.
and that really do not reflect, a positive
Redirect.
content. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I think maybe every time we've had a recession in the last couple of decades, people have not done that. Okay. It
No.
was how do we get out of it quick? Anything that can get us out of this, pump huge amounts of money at the Fed, have these big bailout bills, bail out, Wall Street, bail out the car companies, bail out the airlines, bail out anybody who raises their hands. But if we keep doing that, we're only going to end up with a more and more unstable, unsustainable, false economic world that will hurt people badly when it finally comes to an end. And I think that's sort of where I am, with the book.
Right.
We have to reset. We
Right.
have to pivot in a more healthy, sustainable, prudent direction economically, both at the household level and also, obviously, especially at
At
the
the government
government
level.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We can't reset things that we're not reviewing. I say to a lot of people that get stuck in their life, like I was doing so well, but I'm stuck and I don't know how to move forward. And I just say, stop. pause, take a breath, look back at how far you've come.
Hmm.
Give yourself some
Exactly.
praise for how far you've actually come. Right
Yeah.
now, knowing that, use that as a motivation in
Right.
clarity to move forward, one step at a time. It's not asking you to take leaps, it's asking you to take one step at a time. And that means being aware, asking the questions, really reflecting on what has been and what how you feel about it, where you would like to go with it. Right? We
Hmm.
stop being in such a goddamn rush where you're
Yeah.
missing all the signs and you're
Right.
missing
Right.
all the answers. Slow
Yeah.
down, pause, deduce, ask the right questions, and then apply.
Yeah. I agree. And the other thing I would add is don't be fearful
Right.
of
Don't fret it.
facing the unpleasant facts.
Yes.
Okay. The worst thing to do is to sugarcoat things, is to, you know, ignore the hard realities that are coming both at the country and also a lot of families that have gotten in over their heads. They're living beyond their means. They have too much debt. They're spending 104% of their paycheck. All of those kind of things, they have to be addressed. They have to be rectified, because you can't spend 104% of your paycheck week in, week out
No.
and expect it's going to end well, because it won't.
We have so many people that, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their homes. We have so much more homelessness now. I'm
Yeah.
here in Victoria, BC, and there's tents everywhere. And right now we've got like a foot of snow everywhere. And like yesterday, Arctic winds that were just so goddamn cold. And
Yeah.
it's like, how do people survive that? It's that why are we not looking at generating, coming together? I always say the village is only as strong as everybody's participation. And,
Hmm.
we can't rule people out because they're on the down and out. We don't want a
Right.
handout, we want a hand up. How do we
Yeah.
help them rise up? How do we help them become a part of that equation? If somebody's got this big house and they can't sell it because it's not the right time to it, do you have extra rooms that
Yeah.
somebody can
Yeah.
come into, and maybe they can house clean, maybe they can do this,
Yeah.
maybe they can do
Yeah.
that. The thing is, we've got to think that A, there is no box, and that we've also, one of the hugest things which I stand by, stop putting a dollar sign on people. People are
Yeah.
not a dollar sign. People have their own enrichment, their own abilities, their own contribution. And just some people haven't been aware of it yet. Some people, it's been knocked the hell out of them. Some people are on the journey to find out what that contribution is. If we just spent more time actually investing in the people and helping people to be abundant, enriched in
Hmm.
who they are as a person, we would actually see the economics change around the world.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I couldn't really add anything to that, because no, it's fundamental. It's
It
fundamental,
is.
and
It is.
we have to. But what you're saying is we have to look to ourselves
Yes.
and our own aspirations and our own talents and our own
Mhm.
history in order to move forward. We can't just stand around waiting for the government to make everything, fix everything and make it all good overnight. Because the more we become dependent on government, the more likely, well, the government's going to make mistakes. The
Yes.
lobbyists are going to have too much influence,
Right.
and you're going to end up high and dry. You're going to
Yeah,
end up
we
paying the
are.
tax.
We're
Yeah,
already high and dry because of their choices.
yeah,
So if we want to change the system, we have to change our approach, which means we've got to change the accountability in how we participate in our own lives.
right.
People want love. You've got to be the love. You want peace. You've got to be the peace. You want prosperity.
Yeah,
You've got to be the prosperity. You want to be
right,
able to stand for something that is out there giving to people. Well, then you've got to be it. Stop
right.
chasing it and become it. And when you become it, you become part of the solution that now actually has a wonderful ripple effect on, solving that puzzle, that equation
Mhm.
collectively. But it isn't about just somebody else doing it and you just backing them. It's what are you doing? What are you participating in? Because we've got to realize we are all renters on this planet. There is
Yes,
no free ride. Every single
that's
one of
right.
us has to contribute. And it doesn't matter if you're in the orchestra, you're the triangle, or you're the main,
Yeah.
main person. The whole
First
point is
violin, first chair.
exactly.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
about our participation, not comparing, not competing, but collaborating. cohesively together. And when we get to that, when we actually understand that's the enrichment and the abundance of humanity, the resources and the creativity in a human being, and what we're capable of doing, what we're capable of generating, how we're capable of finding solutions, then we'll actually really truly understand where the real currency is.
Okay, well, I think we've covered some pretty good ground here. So I think I'm going to have to sign off for now. I've got other things I
Nope.
need to
Tell
do,
us
but
how people can get your book and also
uh,
your site. How do they
yeah,
find you?
okay. The book, the easiest way to get it is on Amazon. You just click onto Amazon and you'll find it. And I publish a newsletter every day that discuss all these issues that we've been going over for the last little while here. It's called David Stockman's Contra Corner, and contra means contrarian. So it doesn't, go along with all the mainstream thinking and all the established narrative. It provides a alternative view of what's going on in the world financially, Wall Street, Washington, internationally, and so forth. And that you can find very easily just by Googling David Stockman's Contra Corner. It'll come up. You could click on, and there's a way to sign up for the newsletter.
Right. And you've got the great money bubble, David A. Stockman, folks. Put his name in here to get his whole show page with everything on it. But also you can go to Amazon and put the name in. The link is here too, to get it. Preparation, being aware, knowing your part in it, being willing and open to discussion, be willing to ask stupid questions. You don't have to have the perfect question, but if it's a stupid question, it will lead to, a clarification. So it's just we've got to participate. We've got to stop sitting by and just letting everybody else ruin our lives. We've got to participate,
There
and
you
we're the
go.
ones to put things right. So thank you so much for sharing with us, David.
Very good. Good to be with you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Until next time, remember, we're all in this, folks, whether you're in America, Canada, or anywhere else in the world, we're all in this. So let's step up and let's make the changes necessary. Bye for now.
Very good.
We hope that you enjoyed the show. Find all of our shows on selfdiscoverymedia.com under podcasts or self-discovery-media/shows. And for all our current shows, go to What's New. We are supported by you, the audience. You'll see a nice big shiny blue button for one-time donations, or follow us on Patreon and you will be able to support us there. We enjoy bringing you such wisdom. And the next show will be up in just a moment.